Good morning, everyone. I'm Neha, Ambassador of Change for GETI, that is Global Education and Training Institute, founded and conceptualized by Dr. Sunita Gandhi with the vision of disrupting the education movement as we know it. We also organize pre service and in service training for teachers so that they can help spearhead this disruptive education movement. And under the same umbrella, with much enthusiasm, we also organize deep talks where we invite policymakers, educators, bureaucrats, and various people from the education fraternity to help discuss these various best practices in education with us. And today, I am very honored to have with us Dr. Ritu Dangwal, who is an associate professor at the NIIT University, Delhi, and she carries with herself a huge experience of more than 20 years in the education and in the corporate fraternity. And ma'am will be condensing her rich experience today, talking about assessments. A very warm welcome to you, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, and pleasure is mine. So, a very hearty welcome to everybody, all the viewers who are watching this. I would be walking through my understanding of the assessment in the new normal. It's obviously not prescriptive, it is just suggestive. Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
all right. So, what's happened in COVID, right? COVID, because COVID has really created a confusion, a chaos in our lives. It has impacted all of us in terms of emotionally, behaviorally, mentally. Yeah, and it has led to anxiety. It has led to stress, feeling of isolation, depression, lack of motivation. And interestingly, it has touched each and every individual. There's not even one person on planet who's kind of not being touched by COVID. More so, whether you are a student, whether you are a mother, you are a teacher, you're a brother, sister, every aspect of our lives has been affected by COVID. And what really happened was, apart from the fact that it was fatal, it was something which was completely unexpected. And because it was unexpected, we were not prepared. We were unprepared. And I think that is where the confusion lied. Um, it has affected every sector, and we all know about it. If I were to talk about the education space, um, when COVID happened, we all know schools, colleges all across the world closed down. Teachers and students and parents were struggling to settle in this new reality. In fact, we still haven't got in terms with the fact that is this the new reality, or are we looking at pining for the old normal? As a result, schools started looking for contingency plans, and the only thing that they could, and even colleges for that matter, was coming online. That itself has a huge set of problems. When I say huge, it is very much in present. There is challenge of infrastructure, which means connectivity issues, reachability issues. In schools who can afford, because some schools do have, and mostly schools would have, especially in the metropolitan cities, you have a learning management system. What about schools where there is no connectivity? Uh, Interestingly, even in schools where there was connectivity and students had laptop because of their parents, the issue was, how is the teaching effective? Because the student is right, like I am talking to you now. I cannot see any one of you. Yes, and I'm assuming there's an assumption, underlying assumption, that you're listening and you're watching. And it's the same where students are concerned. And that obviously throws another set of challenges. So basically, what we are trying to do as educators we're trying to adapt ourselves to this new reality, and hoping to ensure that students are able to engage in the learning process. Okay, so the big question here is, um, are students still learning? That's one. And second, what are assessment challenges? And interestingly, both go hand in hand. So let me talk about how I understand assessment, right? So it is It is a collection or systematic collection of information, data points, right? And an interpretation of those data points so as to help the student improve his or her learning. This is, of course, kind of very generic in nature. There was an assessment definition in 1990, and I think this is pretty comprehensive, and I quite like this. They say assessment is defined as a process of obtaining information that is used to make educational decisions about students. And what are those? To give feedback to students about his or her own progress, strengths and weaknesses, to judge instructional effectiveness and curricular adequacy, and to inform policy. Now, if you look at this definition, what really is it talking about? It's just not talking about assessment or students. Okay, so you are assessing students on not just one number, but you're assessing in terms of or trying to get a sense of the student's uniqueness. And not just that, but it also touches the instructional process, the instructional design. Yes, and also in terms of the syllabus. Is the syllabus, that means what we are teaching, relevant? And then it goes into the policy making. So I think this really is a very holistic understanding of assessment. And you cannot tear assessment away from pedagogy. You cannot tear assessment away from teaching. It all comes as a bundle. And we have to look at it in terms of a whole, in a wholesome project, a wholesome component. Okay, so typically there are two types of assessment. One is assessment of learning, and one is assessment for learning. So when we say assessment of learning, what does that mean? It means we're trying to understand how much the students have learned at a particular point in time. And when we talk about assessment for learning, we are saying, how can we use assessment to help students learn more? Now, there is a very subtle difference between the two. It's a matter of and for, but the implications are huge. One part, the of learning, is more very clinical in nature, whereas for is much more reformative. Okay. Now, most of us who are in the line of education, and I'm sure as teachers, all of us would know that there are two broad categories of assessments. We have formative assessments and we have summative assessments. So a quick recap on what they are. Formative is basically to understand how much the student has learned during, or is learning, actually learned is the wrong word, is learning during the learning process. So it's very much active. And summative, on the other hand, is basically you want to sum up how much the student has learned. So interestingly, summative assessments are occurring during a learning period. And on the other hand, the summative assessment are typically at the end of the learning activity. So the purpose of formative assessment is to monitor the learning, as against summative, which is to evaluate. The moment you start evaluating, you start judging. And the moment you start judging, that kind of has its own challenges and limitations. So formative assessments basically provide feedback. The purpose is to monitor and to provide feedback to the student, as against to give a score. Of course, formative assessments occur continuously in the entire course unit, whereas summative typically have a limited, it's a periodic intervals, and they're very definitive. And of course, it is formative assessments use a range of question formats, whereas summative, on the other hand, have very limited question formats. So as teachers, as educators, we introduce both of these, but generally we are more skewed towards the summative assessments. We are more towards the number. and not the holistic individual. So if you agree with me, we agree with me, uh, I would like to talk a little bit about the genesis of standardized tests. And interestingly, they started they actually started by the British. And this was in Second World War, when the British soldiers were supposed to undergo standardized tests to get into the forces, to become a soldier. And after which, obviously, it penetrated into Europe and America, and then it went into the schooling system. But actually, the genesis of standardized testing was for war, and the requirement was very simple. We want one response, one behavior that is acceptable. So a soldier has to behave in a certain manner, right, and follow instructions to a certain manner, and the output has to be in a certain manner, very, very definitive, very structured, very, very autocratic, and it has to be in mass production, which means you cannot vary, you cannot be unique. You have to exactly perform. It's like a cloning that we're looking at. So the purpose of assessment, standardized assessment, was triggered for World War. And why am I talking about it? Because somewhere, the genesis, whenever a philosophy or a thought is initiated, we need to understand how relevant it is as of now. Okay. Having said that, assessment to me in the future has to be relevant for the context of the future and not of the past. Which means what? Which means when we are assessing as of now, and I won't even talk of future, because the future is now. So assessments have to be designed and developed in a way which meets the context, the reality in which it is being designed, and not of the past. And here, the role of the teacher changes. I just want to show you this little video. It's not very, very loud, so I would request you if you could just kind of listen to it carefully.
In the beginning, assessment was simple. We'd give something a try. It was obvious when we did not succeed. And it was obvious when we did. This became known as learning. Then formal education arrived. And we invented universities and lecture halls, lesson plans, and final exams. We tested students to see if they learned anything. And then we assessed our own effectiveness as teachers through anecdotal questionnaires and subjective end-of-semester surveys. And this might have been enough when we were graduating high school and college students to take predictable jobs with predictable career paths. But today, educators and students are part of a rapidly changing world. 21st century learners must be able to synthesize knowledge, communicate clearly with others, and create solutions to problems that we don't even know exist. Which means students need personalized, engaging, useful feedback on meaningful work, not multiple choice exams and unexplained letter grades. So whether you're teaching accountants, engineers, artists, welders, scientists, or nurses, your students need detailed feedback on meaningful work so they can become learners, not simply graduates.
All right. So we've understood that the video clearly talked about assessing in the context of the present, the skills that are required, which are very, very different from what the skills were required at that point in time. So when we're going to be talking now about assessment, it's a three-layer thing that we're really trying to tackle with. The first layer we're talking about is the post-COVID, because it just so recently happened, and the unpredictability of COVID. And the very fact that now we are going beyond classrooms. I mean, who could have imagined a formal schooling right? Because formal schooling really means enclosed four walls. And now the schooling was happening beyond the four walls, right? So, and this was obviously because of post COVID or the COVID situation that we're still going, because I don't think COVID is going to go, it's here to stay. The second part is in terms of the 21st century skills that we're talking about. We need to understand that. And lastly, the bedrock of everything is internet, because things have changed. So internet came about, and internet brought about a load of change in the way people are communicating now. And in fact, the
Uh,
post yes.
just, I think we're not able to see the slide change that you're making. It's just the first slide that is visible right now. Are you still on that now?
No, I've changed my slides.
It's not visible now. I think you'll have to do it manually. I think you're using just your keyboard keys to do that. I think you might have to go to the presentation and change them.
I mean, it's a slide show. So I'm pressing my key. That's
Yes.
strange. 1 second.
Yes. Now we can see the slides.
All right.
Next
Yeah,
slide. Yeah.
that means the slideshow. I couldn't bring the slideshow. So I'm sorry. This
It's
is what
okay.
I was talking about in the future, and that we have to talk about the present. And this is when I'm talking about the context in which we're talking about assessment. It's post-COVID, and interestingly, post-COVID is resting on internet because everything is online now. And of course, we need to tackle the 21st century skills because that is what the state of the art is. So I would personally view COVID crisis as an opportunity or a window to transform the existing assessment mechanisms. And I think, or developing new practice if need be. And the Guardian, apparently says that the pandemic has given us a perfect opportunity to reset the education system. All right. So let's just understand what the 21st century skills are. Most of us are aware of it. Nevertheless, I will just reiterate. We talk of learning and innovation skills, so which means we're talking of creativity, innovation, critical thinking, problem solving, communication, and collaboration. That is what these skills that we're talking about, which we need our students to have. Then we're talking about information, media, and technology skills, which is primarily information literacy, media literacy, and ICT literacy. And last of all, we're talking about life and career skills, which means what? It means flexibility, adaptability, initiative, self-direction. Is the student, does he have the ability to have leadership qualities, to be able to take responsibility, to be able to take accountability of his actions or her actions? So the 21st century skills are completely in a different direction altogether. It's actually skills that we are trying to inculcate among students. And therefore, the assessment has to measure these skills. And we really need to change the way we are assessing. So, like I said, we need to build an ecosystem where all the stakeholders are wanting to ensure that the learning is learner centric and it is being supported. They are supporting it. Which means what? Which means the student, which means the parents, which means the teachers, and of course the society at large and the government. We need to revisit our assessments. We need to democratize our assessments. And what does that mean? I will talk about it. I would like to quickly share with you an incident that happened in UK when COVID was happening. So in March 2020, when COVID took over, the government, UK government, announced that they were cancelling the GCSE and A-level exams, and instead of that, the teachers would be assessing them. Obviously, there was a complete uproar. There was a grave concern for teachers and students and parents because they thought, and even government, because they thought that there would be bias, right? And how would teachers assess the students? But of course, this had to be done because they had to have a way in which to evaluate the students. So what the government did was, to avoid grade inflation, they introduced a moderation system, which means they used an algorithm. Okay. Evidently, this approach did not work because the accuracy of the algorithm was very poor. So the students' marks were extremely, extremely harsh. And that kind of completely backfired. So, what they have done, and in fact, the experiments are continuing where they are asking the teachers to predict the scores of the students and then to actually test the student on the particular examination and then to do a correlation to find whether the teacher's prediction of the student's score was exactly what or similar to what the student actually scored in the examination. And interestingly, and this was primarily for English, maths, and science, and they found that it was uniformly matching, which meant that teachers' assessment was as good as the examination assessment. And I am not surprised by this because I think teachers understand the students the best. They are actually interacting with students 24/7 and over a long period of time. So I'm not surprised. Of course, it means that there is a lot of workload for the teachers. But then, like I said, the role of the teacher is going to change. And I think role primarily also could be more skewed towards the assessment part of it, apart from teaching. We'll have to let go of the administrative role possibly. So there is this head of OCUL who was doing this research study in UK. And this is what he said. He said, exams are a bit like a snapshot, a photograph. You capture an instant, it's a form of sampling. Whereas teacher assessment allows teachers to observe students' performance over a much longer period in a rather more complex way, taking into account lots of different pieces of work and arriving at a holistic judgment. So if you see, it's something relating to the 1990 assessment we were talking about, but of course, the teacher brings more value to the assessment. An assessment is not numbers. It's just not a number. You cannot reduce a student to just a number. And yes, how it will happen, I don't have an answer to it, but definitely this is what needs to be done. Okay. Now, we introduced alternative forms of assessment. And what are they? They could be performance-based assessment, they could be authentic assessments, and they could be portfolio assessments. And I'm sure we are familiar with all these type of assessments. When I look at the 21st century assessment strategies, I will be going through it. You could have rubrics, checklist, student contract. So I will quickly walk through what they are. The first is Rubric, which is actually an evaluation tool, which basically the student or the teacher can devise. The teacher can devise for her own understanding of the student. So there are a certain set of criteria and the teacher can tick mark. So she is kind of monitoring or checking the student's performance. This is one. You can adopt many, any, 1, 2, 10, it depends on you really. Checklist. So there is again, either the student, he fills the checklist, so there is a certain statement, and he kind of grades it. So it's basically understanding of what you are doing yourself. Yes, am I good at this? Have I been able to do this? So you are yourself monitoring your own behavior. Remember I talked about democratic assessment? This is what I meant by democratic. Student contract. So there is what you call a learning agreement between the student and the teacher. And they collectively agree on what the strategies of the learning should be and what time and how should the learning happen. And I think, like I said, this is very, very important because this may not necessarily always happen in primary school, but definitely for higher education, higher institution, this is a fantastic mechanism because students need to have accountability. And we are preparing students to join the work of force, where accountability and responsibility become very, very core principles. Then self-reflections. If you could ask students to just maintain a diary, right, or talk about, you could talk about it or write it individually or collectively about what you did, and it doesn't have to be very structured, but we could have a collection of all of these, right? Peer review. And I think this is coming up in a very big way because obviously we're talking of research orientation. We're talking of creating curiosity. We're talking of creating a research orientation, a research mind. So how do you do that? You do peer review, which means you give an assignment and you give it to the peers and ask them to evaluate. And of course, then the teacher oversees it. So we start appreciating our peers. And we also realize that we need to be non-judgmental when we are peer reviewing. Observation. Observation is a very, very fine tool because it's very, very enriching. So they could either use informal or formal observation. They could have anecdotal, combine it with your checklist, rubric. It really depends. It's very free floating. Of course, there are a lot of other factors involved in it, but these are some of the ways in which we could use our assessment rather than having an examination per se. Logs, if students could maintain a log and therefore they track their own progress and their own benchmark, right? Journals. So you make a journal, and in the journal you can have your reflections. You could talk about points of confusion, or how did you handle a controversial issue. So it could be again academic, it could be your thought. So it's basically the child, the individual, the learner is talking about lot many things, not just about the academic part of it, but the processes of learning. So to me, this is what I would suggest. Let us keep the assessment low. The stakes, basically, which means let us not be so rigid about assessments. And the percentage or weightage of marks that we give should be low. So I do understand that there is constraint, and we are using formative and summative. But when you're typically talking about a comprehensive or you're talking about mid-sem 1, let's keep the weightage low. It should be flexible. Assessment should be flexible. And I am completely so in alignment with this, because I feel that if today I may be a very bright student and I have fallen sick, and especially with COVID times where things are unpredictable, my mind is not completely there. So are you going to assess me? Yes, and assess me on a time when for some reason, I'm not up to it. And then you're going to put that as a mark, and it'll get reflected every time I go to an interview panel. I don't think that's fair. So assessments should be flexible. They should also be integrated. And when I mean integrated, it is interesting to have, for example, mathematics and chemistry. So we as teachers bring about subjects together, and we ask a holistic question which has maths and chemistry component, and then we ask the student this. So it becomes integrated and becomes more meaningful. Because in life, when we're doing world of work, when we are, we all are working right now, we don't do things in isolation, we're doing it collectively. Then demonstration of skills through questions using the internet. And this has been extensively used by Professor Sugata Mitra, who's one of the TED speakers, and he got the $1 million award by TED for his exceedingly great work in School in the Cloud. And he talks about souls. What are souls? They are self-organized learning environments. And what you really have to do is, internet is there, and you give a big question to a class of students. And you make them groups, so they fall in groups of 4 or 5. And then you give them questions. So, for example, a question could be, why do you cry when you are sad? Or why do tears come down when you are sad? So it's a question that a student can relate to. And then you give the student, collectively, they find the answer using the internet. And the amount of the plethora of information that you find is far, far more enriching than a question which is so predictable. Then, more importantly, ask questions of which we don't have answers. Why are we consistently testing the memory? I mean, it's actually the rote memory of a student. One is that. And secondly, we are asking questions on things we already know of. We have to prepare the students for future. And future is unpredictable, and we've seen it. Post-COVID, or COVID, has really, really taught us, has thrown us completely off our mark. And it has made us become humbler. So to me, I think the questions, and it is absolutely fine to say, I don't know the answer. Another very important thing here is life. In our life, answers are never black and white. Yes. So in the same way, when as a student, my critical thinking is being developed, and I ask a question and I ask the student to research on the question, it does not necessarily mean that it is either my view, which is correct, or else The answer is not correct. You could have multiple viewpoints as long as you're able to substantiate those points, validate those points. And that's exactly what happens in real life. I may not agree to you, but as long as you are able to defend your argument, I appreciate that. So let's be appreciative of different perspectives. Cheating, because typically it is not relevant now. It does not hold true. So I remember when, even till Nate, you have a classroom. Imagine assessment, testing. What happens? Examination. You have a classroom. You have individual separate desks which are kind of further apart, and you have students covering their hands and putting their hands onto their testing paper and writing it down. And God forbid if somebody looked here and there and he said, "Okay, you're cheating." It is completely irrelevant. Because it's not cheating, it is sharing of information. In real life, what do? You share information. If I'm working in a corporate, I can't say, you know what, I have to work in a team. I can't be a loner. And if I'm a loner, I'm not a good person in the sense that I am not fit for the organization. So are we not preparing our students for the world of work? So there's nothing is cheating. It's just a matter of it's collaboration. Now, any which ways, everything is on the internet. Okay. Then to promote collaboration. This is very, very important. I'm sure most of us are doing this. But even when we're talking about assessments, people can come together and have discussions and understand better. Because we are talking about understanding how much that individual has understood or seeing where his learning is happening. And the learning has to be for the future and not for the past. Of course, we need to focus on formative examinations, and we all know about it. We need to give critical feedback. Feedback, without feedback, you are not closing the loop. So I'm giving you a student, I give you marks, and the student looks at the marks and he says, I've got a D. Really bad. But what understanding does he have beyond that? So it's very, very important that we give feedback. We explain if we want the student or the learner to do better next time, he has to know where he went wrong. Or how better he could have changed the answer to have got more marks if you're chasing marks. But actually, it's not really marks chasing. It has to be chasing of learning. We need to redefine our reward system completely. We need to provide inclusive education, which means what? Which means counseling of parents. Parents play a very, very critical role in this. And we've seen that because especially even for class 11th and 12th students, it's generally the parents, because it's parents are also they've kind of been, they've led it to a very chaotic situation where they do not know what is happening to the child. So now we have to be more careful, and we have to have an inclusive education assessment system. I would like to end with this because I think this is very, very powerful, and it talks about the future. So I think it's very, very critical. Remember the first definition that we talked about, assessment, 1990 definition of assessment, when he talked about the syllabus, the curriculum. We need to assess, everything needs a complete revamping. And I think this is the right time. We are poised at the right position where everybody, whether you're the government, whether you're the parent, whether you're the teacher or the learner, we have to more so work together. And this is the hour when we change. We see how relevant our syllabus is, how relevant is the way we are going about teaching. And I'd like to end this by asking, how are we assessing? Digital, collaborative, experiential? And what are we assessing? Communication, comprehension, and computing. I could possibly talk about this window to share about my university, an IT university named Rana. And we were exactly hit by COVID, just like any other university or school or education institute. And interestingly, we adapted ourselves immediately to COVID and how to deal with it. We completely adapted ourselves. So we used technology because you can't resist. There is no point in resisting because this is the future. So we used Zoom and Google Meet, and we used breakout rooms to get students to collaborate. We have a continuous evaluation system. The weightages are distributed more. Of course, it means more work for the faculty. Of course, it means more work for the teachers. But then you are teaching for a purpose, a higher purpose. We have a lot of projects rather than having standing. And trust you me, it also reduces the workload of the teacher. Because as a teacher, there is a certain, if you look at the syllabus, right? Or if you look at the sub-chapter, if I could bring it to the chapter level, there are some portions that you don't need to tell the students. The students can understand by themselves. There are some portions in the chapter that require the help of the teacher along with the student for understanding. And of course, there are some concepts which only a teacher can talk and understand and teach the students. So if we're able to judiciously allocate the teacher's role and make it more enriching, then I think I'm sure in some ways in which we can tackle. We also at an IT university have what you call the additive curriculum, which is we are trying to integrate, because learning is wholesome, learning is holistic. So we're trying to, for example, I teach psychology. We're trying to teach psychology into an OOPS project, which is a technical project, and we're integrating the two. Big questions. We don't have answers. And we're open to students having answers. And we're absolutely open to say, I don't know the answer right now, but I will also figure it out along with the student. We work in teams. There is a constant constant feedback system that we're having. It's pointless me giving marks to the student and the student just taking the marks till I do not make him or her understand where or she went wrong or could have done better. And yes, connecting with parents is very, very critical. You cannot isolate the parents, because there are three stakeholders in this. It's the institute, it's the student, and it's the parent, because all of them are together in the process. So that's I come to the end of my presentation, and I hope you liked it. Again, like I said, it's not prescriptive, it is just suggestive.
Absolutely. I think, ma'am, I was very overwhelmed with the last video that you shared, which showed how simple jobs are being automated and taken over by robots. And the tagline towards the end was, are our children ready? Will our children be able to do these jobs? And I think the answer would be a resounding no, because I have myself seen through my own couple of years, there were jobs that were done by people and now have been, completely been given to, automated, or are done through internet, or can be done in a jiffy. So yes, that is a very good point that you raised. And I think towards the end, when you mentioned the role of parents, would you like to expand on that role? I'm not sure if parents could be involved at college level, but I think they have a huge involvement at K-12 level when students are, growing. So if you could expand on that, the involvement of parents in assessments, maybe.
Sure. Well, I think overall parents' involvement, if it starts from the very beginning, then
Absolutely.
it becomes natural, and it's not just something very different. It's like when you think of school, you think of teacher and student. We
Yeah.
alienate the parents because the parent thinks that my role is finished. But no,
Hmm.
it's not, because if you see, the parent actually gets the child to the school, drops to the school, and picks the child up. So the parent is deaf, and the parent will ask the child, okay, so tumne kya padhai ki? Because the
Absolutely.
parent is also enabling, when the homework is given. Then you do have PTA meetings.
Yeah.
What is happening really is that, because it's like, this is my role and this is your
Hmm.
role. See,
Hmm.
roles are blurring now. There's nothing as, that this is silo. Teacher
Yeah.
alag hai, student alag hai, parent alag hai. Absolutely not. It has to be collective. And lines are blurring. The very fact that, thanks to COVID, the line of the school blurred, the boundary wall, there was no boundary wall, right?
Yep. Yep.
And also, the parents' involvement is very important, because what happens is that parents, especially now, you do not know what the trauma the child is going through. Tests
Absolutely.
have an anxiety.
Hmm. Hmm.
I may
Yes.
be test anxious, and it's normal competition, because the moment I'm evaluated, there is becomes a judgment. So I am, as an individual, my confidence will go crushing down, right?
Absolutely.
So if, as a parent, and sometimes if parents are not sensitive to what the child is going through, right, they might say something which is hurting to the child. So it's important that the parent is constantly with the child. And I'm not saying that it's 24/7, but his or her interaction is more. Then he will be able to. So suppose the teachers talk, the teacher's interaction with the parent is more, and they could possibly have some, maybe 3 monthly or quarterly meeting, where you have the parent, you have the teacher, and it doesn't have to be, every month, but it's a continuous, where you have the parent and you have the teacher and you have the student talking about.
Okay.
Understand,
Absolutely.
because the role of the parent and the teacher is the same. You are wanting to help your child,
Yeah.
right? And you're wanting the child to get a better job. So, and
Absolutely.
speaking of job, especially now because of COVID,
Hmm.
there are a lot of students that are going through stress. There are a lot of students who are confused, who have no clue, because they don't know why this is happening. There are students who are right now, they are under so much of stress. They used to go out and play, right? Especially for boys and even for girls that we talk to, because physical touch is missing.
Absolutely. Close proximity is missing.
Yeah, everything is changing.
That's a very good point, ma'am. Thank you so much for also highlighting the importance of parents side by side. Throughout your presentation, you highlighted how teachers can, adapt to the new curriculum changes. considering the future of work and the future of workplaces as well. That was a very overwhelming and very striking point, and I think very important also. I think we are beyond the point where we have to stop being overwhelmed with details and have to start working on them, because obviously we have to go towards that. We have to take our students and ourselves also towards that place. So thank you so much for joining us today and enlightening us with your thoughts and that very detailed and neat presentation. And I'm also very so assessments is a sort of weak subject for me. I'm still trying to understand how to understand it. Understand or maybe curate assessments in a way for students that is beneficial for them. And I think your presentation gave me some points to research on. So thank you so much for that as well on a personal note. And I'm sure that the audience that's watching us and will watch us will also take away much from it. But again, before we conclude, do you have any parting thoughts for our audience, teachers, parents, students, maybe educators as well?
Well, I just feel that opportunities come to us in various forms, and it's how we perceive, how we take them. Situations come in, how do we perceive them? So we should take COVID as it's beautifully poised right now because things have completely changed, and I think this is the time that we can leverage. And of course, it's not going to be sudden. Of course, there will be challenges, but if the intent is there, and who said within 3 years or 4 years? But if the intent is there, then I think it's a worth the effort to make.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, ma'am, for again highlighting the importance of intent as well. I was trying to echo your words only, but I think you've put it in a much better way. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope to see you around again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.